The Acolyte is the newest entry in the Star Wars franchise, and probably the most underrated Star Wars story ever. It was the target of a malicious review bombing campaign motivated more by social politics than any sort of artistic critique, which resulted in low viewership. However, I personally think The Acolyte is one of the most intriguing, mature, and well-executed stories to take place in the Star Wars universe. I also think it's a damn shame this show got so much hate, as it's actually a great starting off point for people looking to get into the expansive Star Wars universe. The Acolyte reiterates many of the franchise's classic motifs in new and creative ways, while also bringing its own spin to the world of the Jedi. It's a perfect blend of the fresh and the familiar, and delivers its story in a tight 8-episode package that is packed with rewatchability. In fact, I watched the entirety of The Acolyte 3 times. That may seem extreme, but it's really not that long, only consisting of 8 episodes ranging from 25 to 35 minutes, when you discount the credits. As a lover of cinema, I often find myself skeptical of television series. Their expansive length of episodes tends to abstract the classic story formula in such ways where any sense of finality is lost in the never-ending binge of episodes. Acolyte, however, feels more like a film than it does a television series. There are some exceptions to this, but for the most part, I am convinced it was originally conceived as a film, and I think this is one of the show's biggest strengths. It introduces its story, its characters, then prioritizes them to a satisfying conclusion. So many times nowadays, a first season of a television series is nothing but constant setup, introducing the audience to an overwhelming amount of characters and lore so it can build upon this foundation for seasons to come. The Acolyte has some setup, sure, but it doesn't come at the cost of its story first, and the satisfying sense of finality when the story is concluded at the end of its 8 episodes. The Acolyte forsakes fan service, Easter eggs, and multiple branching storylines in order to give its single story the focus and attention it needs. This results in an appropriate pace, where we get to really know the show's characters and understand the complexity of their emotions. We don't just simply introduce stereotypes and breeze past them to introduce more, or skim over them for the sake of a set piece. The story gives the characters their due. It takes its time to slow things down when we need to sit and contemplate a moment with them, and because of this, anything that happens carries so much more impact. I'll explain what I mean with some examples soon, but first, what exactly is the Acolyte? Well, Wikipedia describes the Acolyte as sci-fi. However, I disagree. This is a common misconception with a lot of Star Wars content, including the original trilogy. Irvin Kershner, the director of The Empire Strikes Back, the second ever Star Wars movie to exist, describes Star Wars as a fairy tale. The original Star Wars movie, A New Hope, is mostly a Western adaptation of the classic Japanese Chanbara film, The Hidden Fortress. Chanbara is the name of a genre of Japanese sword fighting movies. But because of the sci-fi elements, which only live in the surface aesthetics, I think Star Wars should be more appropriately labeled as neo-fantasy or neo-chanbara, with the exception of some shows and movies, such as Rogue One and Andor, that have brought over the Star Wars aesthetic to completely different genres, such as espionage drama and gritty war film. But for the most part, when considering the series of 3 separate trilogies of movies, I feel the former mentioned genres are much more accurate in describing what's actually happening on screen. So where does that leave the Acolyte? Well, originally the show was marketed and advertised to be a detective genre, but I strongly disagree. Sure, there's some mystery and intrigue, but those elements exist in pretty much every movie ever made. No, I think the Acolyte harkens back to Lucas's original version of neo-chanbara, while also introducing a new genre that Star Wars has yet to embody, neo-wuxia. Wuxia, spelled in English W-U-X-I-A, is a genre of Chinese martial arts movies that also have a fantastical element to them. Some scholars might say that wuxia only refers to stories taking place in ancient China, but I do think there are some exceptions to this. For example, the recent Oscar winner, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And that's also why I'm using the neo in neo-wuxia, meaning while the Acolyte is drawing many elements of classic wuxia, it's doing so with a contemporary sci-fi backdrop, much like The Matrix. Speaking of The Matrix, let's examine the first scene of the entire series, which establishes from the very beginning this new wuxia genre, as we are greeted to this world via a force-infused, hand-to-hand martial arts, kung fu-esque fight scene between Master Andara, played by Carrie-Anne Moss of Matrix fame, and the character May, portrayed by newcomer Amandla Stenberg. May is something we haven't seen before, a sort of force-sensitive ninja who bafflingly chooses to attack a Jedi with nothing but her bare hands, and her kunai-esque tiny ninja blades. At the end of this first episode, it's revealed that May's Dark Master has sent her on a mission to kill a Jedi without a weapon. The Jedi are peacekeepers, who live by a code of ethics, one being they do not draw their lightsaber on the unarmed. Because of this, whenever May attacks a Jedi in this manner, the Jedi will choose to defend themselves without their laser sword, resulting in the first ever seen Star Wars martial arts, and it looks fantastic. Sometimes a fight scene is just mindless, entertaining action, but at its best, it is a well-choreographed dance of violence, where we can actually glean the personality of our characters through fighting style and the strategic choices they make in the heat of battle. The Acolyte does exactly that, and I absolutely love it. The show can continue to progress its story and characterize its fighters, while simultaneously giving the audience a fast-paced action set piece. This fight is, after all, our introduction to these characters, yet we can glean some traits of their character through how they choose to fight. We see that Master Andara is composed, calm, reactive, inquisitive, and selfless in her fighting, while May is full of rage, reckless, spontaneous, expressive, and desperate. The show perfectly introduces us to these characters' personalities through the catalyst of a fight scene. I mean, what more do you want? It's fast-paced and entertaining, while also not resorting to compromising story progression. It's perfect. It also does a fantastic job of returning Star Wars to its Chanbara roots, which I love so much. In Chanbara, fight scenes are typically few and far between. Though our main characters are almost always samurai, with a sword bound to their waist, they are not quick to draw their blades. Often much tension is built over time before we eventually see the glimmer of a blade, which results in its unsheathing being a powerful, impactful moment. Like, holy shit, he finally drew his blade, shit's gonna go down. And often the fight scenes aren't long either. Take for instance one of the most classic Chanbara films of all time, a film so significant to cinema it was straight up plagiarized and remade into the spaghetti western classic A Fistful of Dollars. That being Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. It's about 20 or 30 minutes into the film that our protagonist finally draws his sword, and when he does, we only briefly see a flash of silver before it's returned to its scabbard, and what's left is the severed arm of an antagonist lying on the floor and screams of pain as our hero walks away, having made his point. Sound familiar? That's because this mirrors the first time we ever saw a lightsaber in A New Hope. After about half an hour of mounting tension, Ben Kenobi finally draws his lightsaber, if just for a brief moment. A few swings and swooshes, and the blade is withdrawn, and what results is the bloody severed arm of an antagonist lying on the floor, and screams of pain as Obi-Wan walks away, having made his point. This restraint and using a powerful weapon creates a sense of fascination in the viewer, always leaving them wanting more, and building a mythos around the weapon, an aura of power and importance. You know in Star Wars when a lightsaber is drawn, shit is about to hit the fan. But this impact over time has been cheapened by saturation. With shows like The Clone Wars, where characters are constantly using their lightsabers and routinely slicing apart armies of droids, the weapon no longer feels special. It's just like any other weapon at this point, and it no longer signals to the viewer that this is a significant moment. It's just routine. It's what you expect. It becomes mundane, predictable, and even boring. The Acolyte sought to remedy this issue by restoring significance to Star Wars' most iconic weapon. It did this by reintroducing restraint to the Jedi Code, and an antagonist who fights mostly without a weapon. The show gets pretty creative when introducing other ways which compel its Force users to fight hand-to-hand, such as a villain covered in Cortosis armor, a mellow alloy which temporarily shorts out lightsaber blades. These new scenarios never feel contrived, and it allows the show to constantly deliver the viewer both a neo-chanbara experience as well as a neo-wuxia one. As this introductory fight scene progresses, eventually May throws a flurry of kunai at Master Andara, forcing her to finally draw her blade to deflect the attack. The music swells triumphantly, successfully restoring significance to the iconic Star Wars weapon. Master Andara then warns her opponent, "This is a path you do not want to go down." But May uses the Jedi's empathy against her by throwing a kunai at a nearby civilian. Master Andara saves the civilian's life by using the Force, but as she looks down, she sees a kunai has pierced her heart. She falls down dead, and this concludes the cold open of the Acolyte. So what's the overarching story? Well, I'm going to break it down, but I'll give you a warning that this will contain spoilers. Personally, I don't find that spoilers really matter all that much to me. Like I said, I watched the show 3 times in its entirety. I not only did that to be thorough in my review, but because it's the type of story that actually gets better when you watch it a second time. After uncovering its secrets, I was surprised to see how much foreshadowing and double meaning is packed into the beginning episodes. It really enriched the experience, discovering how much thought was put into even the smallest mannerisms of our characters, alluding to their past and hinting at their future. This certain type of satisfaction is not often found in TV shows, as many times serialized television is written season to season, or even episode to episode, and doesn't have the forethought to use such amounts of foreshadowing and actions that imply such complex meanings behind them. But with the Acolyte, it's clear that the whole of the story was considered when writing each individual scene, and it gives the series a real sense of intentionality and a range of depth not commonplace for a Star Wars TV show. Anyway, let's break down the actual plot. So it's revealed early on that May, our villain, is actually following orders of a faceless, nameless Sith Master known by fans as the Stranger. May also has a twin sister, Osha, who is quickly introduced in the show's second scene as the story's main protagonist. Osha is wrongly blamed for her sister's actions and is arrested by the Jedi. This results in Osha being reunited with her old Jedi Master Soul. See, Osha is a former Jedi who left the Order long ago, because she was unable to control her negative emotions, something that is imperative to becoming a Jedi, as negative emotions and the power they grant lead to the dark side of the Force. Once they realize Osha's innocence, Osha joins Soul, along with his apprentice Jeki, and his former apprentice Yord, who was raised and trained alongside Osha in the Jedi Order, on a mission to stop May from killing any more Jedi, and uncover the truth of why she's doing such a thing in the first place. In the second episode, we are introduced to Chimere, a comedic relief character who is May's partner in crime. As May tracks down her second target, a Jedi named Torben, she realizes she cannot touch him, as he has taken the Barash vow. This is a deep meditative state Jedi use to punish themselves out of a sense of deep shame and regret. They take this vow until they once again can find peace in the Force. Torben has been in this state for over 10 years and is surrounded by an impenetrable force field. Upon realizing May cannot defeat this Jedi without a weapon, she requests the help of her partner Chimere, who concocts a poison for her to use. She offers this poison to Torben, offering him the forgiveness he seeks. This causes him to open his eyes, leave his meditative state, and take the poison willingly, with his last words being, "We thought we were doing the right thing." Like, wow, never before have we seen a Jedi straight up commit suicide, and it's incredibly intriguing. What would cause a Jedi of all people to do such a thing? All of a sudden, May's quest for revenge starts to seem somewhat justified, even though we don't know yet what has happened to spring into action her murderous rampage. Osha and the gang of Jedi arrive soon after, and Soul confronts May in another beautifully choreographed fight scene, involving a mix of martial arts and the use of Star Wars' iconic magic system known as the Force. The first 2 episodes are exciting and action-packed. We get to see a variety of locations, both new and familiar. We get some light humor in the form of Chimere, and also from the dynamic between the 2 young Jedi, Jeki and Yord, who have a sort of sibling rivalry type relationship. However, in the 3rd episode, things slow down quite a bit, as the entire episode is a flashback to 16 years prior, covering the childhood of May and Osha, and how their lives became entangled with the Jedi. However, the show takes a Rashomon-style approach to storytelling, and for this first retelling of the past, we see everything exclusively through Osha's perspective. So while much of the mystery is unveiled, we don't see the full picture until episode 7, where the exact same series of events is recapped, this time through the perspective of Soul and May. So 16 years ago, Osha and May are being raised by their pair of mothers on the planet Brendok, amongst a secluded, hidden cove of witches. We get insight into the tumultuous relationship between May and Osha. Osha is more timid and shy, while May is bold and aggressive, and even shows signs of some sort of personality disorder, as she does things like hurt small animals and is plagued with outbursts of anger. May also seems to be favored by their mothers because of her willingness to embrace the Force, while Osha is more of the black sheep of the family and feels lonely being one of only 2 children in her community. It's implied that somehow Osha and May were not conventionally conceived, but rather created by their mother, who was a powerful Force user and leader of the Coven. One day, 4 Jedi casually forced themselves into the Coven grounds. Master Andara from the first episode, her young apprentice Corbin, Master Sol, who we know now as Osha's former master, and Master Konaka, a Jedi Wookiee we have not seen until this point. They interrupt a ceremony where the Coven is drawing some sort of mysterious power from a deep hole in the ground and bestowing it upon the young girls in an act they refer to as Ascension. The Jedi say they've arrived to test the younglings for Force sensitivity and offer them a chance to return with them to Coruscant and train as Jedi. May wants nothing to do with the Jedi, while Osha is intrigued at the proposal and insists her mothers let her take the test. She wants to be a Jedi, to see the world, and experience a life outside of their small, isolated coven. May is deeply bothered by Osha's interest in leaving, and in a desperate attempt to make her stay, she locks Osha inside a room and starts a fire that spreads and destroys their home. But not before Sol rescues Osha, but not May, who falls into a cavity and is presumed dead. Because of these events, May grows up with a deep hatred for her sister May, as she blames her for the death of her family. But before May started enacting revenge on these 4 Jedi 16 years later, Osha and May thought that either was dead, and their now known survival forces both of them to question their motives and their worldview. Episode 3 is definitely the weakest episode of The Acolyte. It's slow and doesn't have any action set pieces. It's interesting upon first viewing to discover some insight into the tragedy that set the show's events in motion, but upon my second and third viewing, this episode in particular was a bit of a chore to watch, made especially by the fact that episode 7 covers the same exact events, but this time with a more interesting, thorough perspective, and ends with one of the best and even surprising battles of the entire series. More on that later. In episode 4, we return to the present. We now know who May's next target is, that being the Wookiee Jedi Kelnaka, who since the tragedy of Brendok has isolated himself in the deep jungle on a far-off planet. This certainly raises the stakes and builds a lot of hype, as the viewer is now being promised an epic duel with a Jedi Wookiee, something we've never seen before in live action. Jedi, of course, are some of the most powerful, capable beings of the Star Wars universe, as well are the race of giant furry Wookiees. So one can only assume a Jedi Wookiee would be a formidable force to the likes we've never seen. Episode 4 is all about setting up for the climactic insanity of Episode 5, but this in no way means it's a bad episode. It focuses heavily on character development. We see more of the relationship between Chimere and May as they venture through the jungle, seeking the home of Konaka. We get some new insight into how much May cares about Osha, and her frustrations and fears with her mysterious Sith master known as the Stranger. Back on Coruscant, we watch as many different conversations take place, further establishing our protagonist's motives and relationships with each other. Osha has bonded to her new Jedi crew through their previous adventures, and we see that Sol is hell-bent on pursuing May himself, even against the wishes of his Jedi master, Master Vernestra. I've glossed over Vernestra to this point, but I'll speak more on her later. One thing I want to say is I really enjoy the look of the Acolyte. Everything from the character designs to the lively populated and beautiful locations we see shows us this is a show of great visual quality and creativity. In true Star Wars fashion, the backgrounds are littered with a bevy of unique-looking alien races and technology that really immerses the viewer and makes the world seem real and palpable. Everything is colorful and really pops. The high-quality set and costume design certainly evokes something more akin to a feature film than just a TV series. All of this really adds to the rewatchability of the Acolyte, as at any time, there are so many little intriguing details to take in. It all feels very much like Star Wars and evokes that childhood nostalgia so many people have been chasing since the prequels concluded in the early 2000s. In Episode 4, we also get introduced to a new character, Basil. Basil is a little otter-like person who is accompanying the Jedi as a tracker to help them find Master Konaka before May does. I love the inclusion of this character. He is portrayed by a little person, and in my opinion, these practically made types of little characters are iconic to Star Wars' identity. From Jawas to Ewoks, we've always had characters of this sort, and the inclusion of Basil really seals the deal on making the Acolyte feel like an official Star Wars experience. So it's a race to find the Wookiee Jedi. Master Sol, Osha, Jeki, Yord, and Basil are accompanied by a group of nameless Jedi as they race May and Kymir through the dark forest of tall trees to save the Wookiee's life. Along the way, we get one of my favorite lines from the Acolyte when Jeki tells Osha, "We are not defined by what we've lost, but rather by what we've survived." The only bit of action we get is when the Jedi envoy is attacked by a giant flying insect known as an Umbra Moth. Even though this scene is brief, I really like it for the impact it has on the viewer. The Umbra Moth is portrayed by both CGI and a puppet, making it feel more real and scary because of it. When Sol draws his lightsaber, it's the first time we've ever seen him do so, which really carries some weight to it. And the scene isn't just shoehorned into the episode to cater to the viewers, but rather it's all set up for the absolute explosion of action and violence that is Episode 5. Meanwhile, May restrains Kymir and tells him she is going to abandon her mission. She states her true loyalty lies to Osha, and because of this, she's going to turn herself in to Master Konaka, and use the information she knows about the stranger to regain favor in the eyes of the Jedi. But as she finally reaches Konaka's home, she discovers him lying there dead, with a fresh lightsaber slash across his chest, and she whispers in horror, "He's here." It's a pretty surprising reveal, one I initially felt very conflicted about. On one hand, I thought it was a genuine surprise and was glad to have my expectations subverted in such a way. It's also a cool way to really raise the stakes and evoke tension. On the other hand, I was deeply disappointed because for several episodes now, the show was hyping up a battle with Konaka, and I was stoked to see some Wookiee Jedi action. However, in another brilliant subversion of expectations, we do eventually get to see the Jedi Wookiee in action, just later on in the show. And because you're led to believe this is the last you'll see of Konaka, it makes that later moment even more gratifying to witness. So overall, with everything in mind, this is a really cool reveal. The episode ends with the Jedi crew arriving at Konaka's home, but in the background, a dark shadowy figure unnervingly descends into view, draws his red blade, and with a powerful force push, scatters the Jedi in every direction. Damn. Episode 5, titled Night, is one of the coolest Star Wars battles in the entirety of its several decade-long canon. Not just for the inherent quality this episode has on its own, but because of the slow burn which has led to this point. After 4 episodes of Jedi fighting with restraint, engaging hand-to-hand instead of blade-to-blade, and the story building with ever-mounting tension, the absolute explosion of violence that erupts on screen is incredibly gratifying. There's so much I could say about why I love this episode. Everything from the dark forest scenery, the brilliant choreography, and the pacing works in tandem to create what I consider an iconic series of scenes. As a viewer, you're led to believe you probably won't see the stranger engaging in combat until the end of the series, but all of a sudden he's here, fighting in full force, an entire envoy of Jedi. Shit hits the fan. The show goes from 1 to 1,000. It so strongly resembles the satisfaction I've gotten time and time again from watching Japanese chanbara. The viewer is fully rewarded for their patience by being witness to a truly epic, all-out brawl featuring all of the characters we've come to know until this point. We haven't seen Jeki or Yord fight at all, and here they are fighting for their lives against the series' most formidable villain. The episode immediately opens with the stranger decimating the remaining nameless Jedi who have accompanied our main cast. He uses an erratic fighting style, as well as Cortosis armor, which can briefly short out lightsabers when struck. He fights with both brutality and cruel trickery, all the while silent, his face covered in a menacing mask which resembles a Cheshire cat smile. I love how this fight progresses with its many stages. We see the stranger ripping through Jedi with ease. We get a hand-to-hand wuxia-esque duel between Mei and Jecki as Jecki attempts to arrest Mei. We see how Soul's fighting prowess outmatches his peers as he goes toe-to-toe with the stranger, and there's so many mix-ups to the action, like when Jecki fights the stranger 1v1 while both using her own and Master Kanaka's saber. Jecki and Soul fighting the stranger together as the stranger is chasing down Mei, trying to kill her. It's a long fight sequence, and as the stranger talks to Soul between moments of clashing blades, the story is also progressed by some intriguing lines of dialogue. Like when Soul asks the stranger, "What kind of master hides his face from his pupil?" And the stranger replies, "You tell me." God, I love this episode so much. It's easily the best part of the entire series. The only downside to it is how the show fails to top this moment moving forward. As the battle progresses, the fighting becomes more and more furious. Eventually, Jecki's rage gets the best of her, and in a fit of screams, she attacks the stranger with brutal force, smashing his face several times, knocking his mask off. We see his helmet hit the ground. Next, we see him split his lightsaber part into 2 separate blades, and as Jecki's attack is blocked with one, the other pierces her 3 times through the chest. Jecki falls to the ground dead as the stranger's identity is finally revealed. It's no other than Chimere, Mei's hapless, seemingly innocuous assistant. God, this moment is fucking brilliant. In just a few seconds, we get 3 absolute whammies. The reveal of a new type of lightsaber, Jecki's death, and the identity of the stranger, all working in tandem to accentuate each other. It's such a powerful reveal. Truly gives me goddamn goosebumps. As if this wasn't enough, Yord attacks Chimere immediately after this, and the Sith Lord snaps his fucking neck, instantly killing him. Like, holy shit! My jaw was floored. I mean, like, damn. There's another great line here when Chimere tells Osha she shouldn't trust Soul after everything he's done to her. Soul cries out, "His mind is twisted by darkness." And Chimere responds, "I've accepted my darkness. What have you done with yours?" This is a great line because it not only hints at Soul's past mistakes and how he hasn't truly come to terms with the things he's done, but it's one of many lines that help the viewer understand the dark side of the Force. The majority of those lines taking place in the next episode. Thanks to Osha's cleverness, Chimere is eventually carried off by a swarm of Umber Moths, which offers a cool haunting visual. Mei then knocks Soul unconscious, and at last the twins are reunited, devoid of interference. As the sun rises, the twins try to convince each other that the other is right about things, with Mei insisting Osha is brainwashed. The two spar, and Osha is knocked unconscious from Mei's force push. Mei then takes Yord's saber and slices off her hair, resulting in her being more identical to Osha. I love the choir vocalizations that kick in when this happens. It's a cool way to accent the point. Overall, the music of the Acolyte is fantastic, and the more unique audio stings such as this, and later the screechy violin, are used sparingly and thus to great effect. Anytime there are twins present on screen, you can damn well be sure they are gonna make the old switcheroo at some point. Honestly, this sort of plot device typically annoys me, and originally I was bothered by this. But since it's later revealed that Osha and Mei are the same person, simply being one consciousness split into 2, I can accept this switch because them being twins means a lot more to the story than just being set up for a moment like this. So the end of episode 5 concludes in Mei leaving with Soul because he thinks she's Osha, and Osha unwillingly leaving with Chimere. I can also accept this switch because it doesn't last long. It's understandable after such a traumatic night and being in a rush to leave that Soul's connection with the Force would be weakened, and he wouldn't immediately recognize the switch. Had they had this deception last long, it would have become unbelievable. But it's not far into episode 6 he discovers the imposter, so it's easier to suspend my disbelief. Episode 6 deals with the falling action of this catastrophic night. The most interesting aspect being Osha's time with Chimere. One thing I love about the Acolyte is how well it makes you empathize with Dark Force users, and criticizes the Jedi. Ever since the prequels, we've been told the Jedi are arrogant, and their control is hubris, but we don't really get any examples of that. And we are told the Dark Force is compelled by powerful emotions, but again, don't get a lot of evidence of this besides people just wanting to be typical evil movie villains. Much like how the show Andor really made you understand why the Empire ruling the galaxy is such a bad thing, something we are just told and have to accept in the original trilogy, The Acolyte does the same with understanding why certain people don't like the Jedi and would later advocate for their fall. Because of this, watching Andor greatly enhances the effectiveness of the original trilogy, and in my opinion, the Acolyte does the same for the prequel trilogy. We see the cracks in the Jedi's noble rule, how they are driven to corruption in order to protect themselves from politicians who seek to strip them of their power. And we see how someone with noble intentions can be driven to the dark side through traumatic experiences and alienation. Hymir, also known as the Stranger, is the most empathetic we've seen a Sith be in a live-action Star Wars canon. He's charming and likable, but also does horrible things, seemingly in the name of his self-preservation. Sol is exactly the same, loving and kind, but driven to commit atrocities in the name of self-preservation. Both have goals you can empathize with, but they take them to the extreme, out of a sense of right and justice. Hearing news of the slaughtered Jedi, Master Venestra must now personally investigate what is going on. Venestra is a strict, hardened Jedi master of old. She's pragmatic and keeps the whole of his situation in mind. Her role as a leader in the Jedi Temple means she prioritizes the political aspect of their actions, how the Jedi's actions will be perceived by people and politicians. We see later on that certain politicians seek to weaken the Jedi's influence out of a sense of mistrust. Venestra does not want word of what's happening getting out. She ventures to the scene of the previous night with her Padawan and caravan of Jedi. Venestra is also incredibly insightful in a metaphysical way due to her strong connection with the Force, and is able to discern certain events of the past by being in the same place it happened. Exactly like Episode 4, the only action sequence in this episode is when Venestra is briefly attacked by an Umbra Moth, of which she quickly dispatches with her Light Whip, a purple lightsaber that functions like a whip. Again, a new saber type we haven't seen before. It's pretty fucking cool, but unfortunately, this brief scene is the only time we get to see the Light Whip. It's a damn shame because the show seems to be setting our expectations to see Venestra engaged in a proper battle with her unique saber, but it never happens, presumably being saved for the never-to-happen Season 2. More on that later. So Episode 6 concludes with Osha symbolically trying on the Stranger's helmet, and Sol keeping May captive with the intent to rationalize to her his part in the tragedy of Brendok 16 years ago. Episode 7 is the same as Episode 3. The entire episode is a retelling of the same flashback, but this time from Sol and May's perspective. We see that the Jedi were originally stationed on Brendok to investigate a divergence in the Force, which apparently is a source of unparalleled Force energy and is implied to be the hole which the Coven seem to draw their power. When I first saw this, I was like, okay, I guess that's just a thing now. But actually, it's been a thing since the second ever Star Wars movie. Remember the cave on Dagobah where Luke confronts a vision of Vader? That's a Force divergence. In The Phantom Menace, the first of the prequels, Qui-Gon Jinn states he believes Anakin is a vergence in the Force. Or how about the cave on Ahch-To, where Rey also sees abstract visions, also a vergence in the Force. So this concept is actually a long-established Star Wars canon. My second thought was, oh shit, so this is how Anakin was conceived without a father? Someone used a Force vergence to create him? But that's not quite true. I looked it up, and apparently the Chosen One was created by the cosmic powers that be. Essentially, Anakin was created by God to bring balance, meaning he is truly unique in his origin, despite Star Wars introducing new characters who were created in a similar way. So Master Andara, her Padawan Torben, Sol, and Kelnaka are investigating the planet. I like the pacing of these scenes. It's very peaceful and meditative, watching the Jedi simply collect samples of plants and the like. However, Torben is not at peace. He's young and restless, and greatly misses his exciting home of Coruscant. He complains of the boring fieldwork and is desperate to leave. One day, Sol stumbles upon the young twins, and follows them, spying on them throughout their day. He witnesses their training in the Force, which compared to the Jedi, is a bit more brash and hardcore. Only seeing one piece of a whole, he draws conclusions, fearing for the safety of the young girls. This, coupled with his desire to have a Padawan, motivates him to intervene in the young girls' lives and test them for potential Jedi training. Andara does not agree, nor does the Council, who advises the Jedi to leave the Coven alone. But Sol is persistent and strong-arms the gang into invading the Coven's home and testing the girls anyway. Later that night, while discussing the situation, Torben realizes the twins are his ticket home, as together they prove the existence of the Force Virgins. Torben rushes off to the Coven, and Sol is sent to stop him, but rather than stop him, the two team up, motivated by different goals to retrieve the girls. At this point, tension is high between the Jedi and the Coven. As a standoff commences between the two Jedi and the witches, May, having accidentally set off a fire, rushes into the scene. May's mother begins to take a shadowy form, engulfing May, probably to simply take her out of the dangerous situation. But Sol, not being familiar with such magic, misinterprets her intentions and in a reckless move draws his blade, pierces the mother, and kills her right there in front of her daughter. All hell breaks loose, with the witches letting loose a flurry of arrows at Torben, and Sol, now overwhelmed by regret, defends himself against the twins' last remaining mother. Shit really hits the fan when Kalnaka arrives on scene, and the witches, who have now fled behind closed doors, work together to collectively possess Kalnaka to attack Sol and Torben. Here we finally get our long-awaited Jedi-Wookiee action, and it does not disappoint. The only difference here is where before we thought we'd be cheering for Kalnaka, this scene feels more like a horror movie, with Sol and Torben having to defend themselves against their ally, who greatly outmatches them. The fight with Kalnaka is so cool. Being a Wookiee, he has far greater strength and agility than his human counterparts. It's scary. Again, it feels like a horror flick, with Kalnaka disfiguring Torben's face with his claws and almost choking Sol to death. Thankfully, the Great Master Andara arrives just in time. She uses the Force to free Kalnaka's mind of the Coven's grasp, which in turn severs their connection to the Force, killing the Coven. Lastly, we see Sol rescue Osha as May falls down into the chasm, and later, when an unconscious Osha wakes up aboard the Jedi ship, asking what happened, we see the same thing we saw many episodes ago, Sol telling her that her sister set a fire which destroyed her home, omitting completely how he and the rest of the Jedi killed her entire family. Episode 7 is fantastic, and finally being given the full truth of the matter, we can glean the themes of the Acolyte, one of which being outside intervention. It's clear that the Acolyte is trying to draw real-world comparisons by showing a larger, more, quote, advanced civilization trying to intervene and do what they think is best for a smaller, different culture to which they don't fully understand. I love how we see 4 different people argue over what is best for the girls, that being the 2 mothers, Sol and Andara, who all truly want what's best for the girls, but are all approaching the matter through their own lens of selfish wants, and what results is a series of arguments, culminating in a tragic outbreak of violence. There's a lot to chew on here. The Acolyte isn't just a casual fun time like other Star Wars entries. It has something important to say, and doesn't shy away from getting a bit dark in order to do so. It's a story about an unavoidable tragedy, set in motion by selfish desires, resulting in a series of traumatic events, and hurt people trying to cope with their traumatic past in different ways, as they are influenced by those who seek to use their trauma for their own benefit. Much like its Chanbara roots, Episode 7 is another slow burn of ever-mounting tension, being released in a climactic clash of swords. The Acolyte doesn't have a lot of fights, but the ones it does have always mean a whole awful lot, because this is a series which prioritizes story over mindless entertainment. However, we still got one last episode to discuss before I start giving all my final thoughts. So Episode 8. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a disappointment. There's a lot I like about this episode, and overall I was satisfied by how the Acolyte chose to wrap up its story. It ends with a satisfying sense of finality, but there's some big issues that plague this episode. For starters, it fails to top its previous chapters in terms of action set pieces. We get to see one last duel between the Stranger and Sol, which is paralleled by one last martial arts fight between the 2 siblings. It's still a cool sequence, with some thoughtful cinematography as the scenes cut back and forth, and the always consistent creative choreography the Acolyte has delivered up until this point. The problem lies in the fact that after the epic scale of Episode 5, this just seems a little underwhelming. For one, it's heavily implied that Kymir is Vernestra's former Jedi apprentice, and for some reason she tried to kill Kymir, leaving him with a vicious scar on his back. As the duel between the 2 duos commence, Vernestra is making her way to them with another gang of Jedi. I really thought we were saving a duel with Vernestra for the ultimate climax. I was so stoked to see that light whip in action, and it would have been a great way to raise the excitement for this final conflict. However, it doesn't happen. Vernestra doesn't arrive till after the fighting has concluded. It was really disappointing. At least one reason I can theorize why they didn't do this was to keep the story focused on our main characters, and not dilute the effects of one story being concluded by introducing a new conflict with a minor character. I can respect they wanted to give Soul and Osha's story the attention it deserved, but it's annoying to see them dangle this potential with Vernestra in front of us. Clearly this was something to look forward to for a second season, but I hate this type of cliffhanger writing. At least for the most part, the Acolyte doesn't fall victim to much of this annoying style of writing, but it's most evident in Vernestra's character, and the alluded to past of her and Chimere. Because we are never going to get a second season of the Acolyte, it makes this situation with Vernestra more disappointing. Like, I wish we could have at least seen something more exciting with her character than just the one time she swatted down an Umbra Moth. But oh well. Another thing that makes this final episode feel underwhelming is another choice I can at least empathize with, and that's to have the climactic conclusion take place on Brendok. For thematic and story reasons, this makes a lot of sense. It greatly enhances all our characters' feelings as it draws them closer to the past, as well as being necessary for Soul to prove the existence of Emergence and justify his crimes. But from a visual standpoint, it's a little dull. If you think about other Star Wars movies, or movies in general, usually the final fight takes place at a previously unseen location, typically somewhere exciting and unpredictable to raise the stakes as well as the excitement. It makes complete sense why our characters end up here, and in many ways it's necessary for the story. But it also just feels a little cheap. It's the one time the show really starts to feel like a show and not a movie, like they couldn't afford an entirely new location and instead had to reuse a previous set. Especially since the previous episode takes place on Brendok, it just greatly lowers the excitement. It doesn't feel quite right. But again, it makes sense from a story perspective, so overall, I'm just conflicted about this decision and a little let down. God, I gotta wrap this review up. This video is long as all hell. But honestly, there's still so many cool details I haven't discussed, like the cool Naruto-looking cat dude you see in the background at one point. The fact that when the stranger splits his saber in two, one is shorter than the other, further evoking Chanbara, as the samurai would also carry two blades, one shorter than the other. The cool little cinematic techniques used throughout the series that remind me of horror films, or the monologue the politician gives in the final episode to Vernestra that makes you think, damn, maybe the Jedi do suck. Covering an entire season of TV is hard, even if it's a short one, because especially in the case of the Acolyte, there's just so much I could say. I really enjoyed the show. I think it's one of the best Star Wars entries ever, given it's now the oldest of the prequels, taking place about 100 years before Episode 1, and the fact that it does a great job of explaining the Force and the reign of the Jedi. I also think it's a great starting off point for anyone looking to get into the Star Wars franchise, or curious enough to check it out. Like I said, the Acolyte is pretty short. You could easily edit the entire season down into a single movie, and I'm sure fans will do so. Hell, I was even considering trying it myself. Like I said, this is one of the greatest strengths of the Acolyte. It's not plagued by the issues other television shows have with their excessive length. It's a single, isolated story that doesn't lose sight of its main characters, or fall victim to annoying fan service, or a desire to endlessly set up plot threads that won't pay off till much later. For the most part, it's a self-contained Star Wars story, giving us much needed insight into the folly of the Jedi and the creation of dark side users known as the Sith. Well, why then is the Acolyte so widely hated by fans, having been the target of review bomb campaigns, making it the lowest rated Star Wars ever? Well, that's easy. People are fucking assholes. No, really. I searched on YouTube the Acolyte review, and all the videos which came up all had titles stating it was the worst Star Wars ever. Why does this make people assholes though? Well, I saw on one of the first videos that came up, on his thumbnail caption, the words, "Another girl boss show." That and the fact that fans were already hating on the show before it even came out, because the creator and showrunner is a lesbian. And that's what I'm getting at. People hate the Acolyte because of its diverse cast. It stars a black woman, the actress which is a known advocate for queer people, the main character's parents are a gay couple, and besides Torben and Vernestra's Padawan, there's a distinct lack of white men in this cast. This does not make the show bad. In fact, it shouldn't bear any influence on your reception of the show. You should have the maturity to be able to empathize with people who aren't exactly like you, and not being able to do so makes you childish and close-minded. I'm truly baffled that in a world where there's so many types of alien races, fans still get hung up whenever a human character isn't a white dude, or when a female character gets to play the role of a warrior instead of a fucking housewife. I mean, grow up, people. Girl boss isn't a thing. Girl boss is a derogatory term for any show portraying strong female characters. People like to say, Disney just does this to cater to people. But clearly that makes no sense. If they wanted to shamelessly cater for views, they would continue the trend of catering to white men, like the previous Star Wars entries have. They wouldn't take such a risk in employing queer people and people of color. Like the Acolyte's creator stated, they aren't even surprised by this reaction. They knew they were taking a risk. It's such a shame we live in such a bigoted society, one filled with gatekeeping jerk-off incels who lose their shit and crap their pants anytime they perceive their favorite nerdy IP has become, quote, woke, because they had the audacity to be inclusive and realistic in their portrayals of humanity. God, I don't even care enough to try to make you people understand. Just like eat a dick and get bent. I'm so sick of your incel bullshit. I'm genuinely angry because of these people's reaction. A second season of The Acolyte will never come to fruition. We won't get more of a good thing because grown adult babies with prejudiced worldviews had to ruin it for everybody. Like, you guys suck. This is the worst part about liking nerdy shit like the Star Wars, is having to be associated with you assholes. I really fucking hate you guys. You're a miserable, pathetic bunch of spiteful losers. Too harsh? Whatever. Don't care. My channel, my rules, my opinion. The Acolyte is a brilliant piece of art and one of my favorite Star Wars stories, and I'm not going to hold back when it comes to defending it and criticizing those who hate it for malevolent reasons. I can accept the show has some flaws, but the fact that they employed a diverse cast is not one of them. That's just straight up bigotry to think so. To be clear, I'm not stating that if you dislike The Acolyte, that makes you an asshole, if you have valid reasons, and not ones motivated by real-life social prejudice. Like maybe you don't like the fact that The Acolyte is pushing the Star Wars IP into the realm of art film and taking creative risk. I suppose it's understandable to want Star Wars to be just a fun time and not a complex, mature story which draws parallels to real-world conflicts. I get that, but personally, it's those aspects of the show that I really enjoy. Okay, time to rate this bitch. 4 out of 5 stars. The biggest reason for it not being a perfect 5 out of 5 is because of its underwhelming final episode, and the third episode, which is a little boring. Again, I think this would probably be better off as a movie, but that's also coming from someone who mostly only watches movies and doesn't watch much TV, which I think is a testament to The Acolyte's quality. It's a thought-provoking piece of cinema. It draws influence from some of my favorite genres. The acting is superb, the fight scenes far outmatch most other Star Wars entries, and the music is fantastic. Its existence makes the overall Star Wars universe make more sense, and it heightens my enjoyment of the other entries as it builds upon the world and fills in the cracks previously neglected. I love The Acolyte. You incels can kiss my ass. Jeremy Irons is a sexy stud, and I'll see you next time. Bye!